Hi, everyone. Oh, it's so nice to see some familiar faces. And to welcome people I haven't met before. Hi, Karen. Hi, Meg. Hi, Leslie. And Nancy, who I saw was on her bicycle. Really great to have you guys here. And I really appreciate you turning on your camera as well because I think the experience is more profound, especially as women who are all trying to bond together and make some changes and growth spurts in our own lives through things like this. So, I am super excited to dive in and share with you what I promised to share with you, which is the three keys that I'd like to present today about basically reigniting not only your emotional intimacy, but your physical intimacy. And I think that's really important because in a lot of courses, people will, talk about communication, and feeling close to your partner. And there seems to be this assumption that if you're close to your partner, that your sex drive will come back. Well, that's not actually true. There are so many things that go into our sex drive that it's a little more complicated than that. But that's not exactly where I want to start, but it does give you an idea of what we're going to talk about today. And this course, or at least this workshop, is for everybody. Whether your relationship's feeling fragile or feeling fantastic, there's so many things that we can learn, and to things that we can learn that will enhance our relationship. Now, as I said to you, what you're going to learn today has the power to open the doors both to your physical mind and your emotional mind, and to shift the patterns that sometimes I think some of us feel are unchangeable. So, what I want to do today is to bring you closer to the connection that you've been longing for. And for those of you who say, well, how can we do this without our spouses with us? Well, interestingly enough, they don't have to be here because as soon as you change, they're impacted. Let me use a common analogy. When somebody gives up drinking and they come back into their relationship, because they change the way they show up, other people have no choice but to change how they react to you. So it's the same kind of thing in your relationship with whether it's your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your spouse, or your long-term partner. But one of the things before we can change that a lot of women don't realize is that we have invisible barriers that hold us back. And I don't know if all of you are so aware of what some of these invisible barriers are, but they're things that society places on all of us, and it colors our self-perception. It's not a weakness in our character or in our sense of self. So let me start by saying, have you ever noticed, I'm not saying that all women feel this way, but that as women, we're being trained to settle for less? It often shows up in subtle ways, like dimming your vision because everyone tells you you're being unrealistic, or editing your desires because you don't want your spouse or partner to tell you that you're being demanding. Or a very popular one is we overgive and undercharge just to prove our worth. But beneath all of that, there's a deeper script. And the script is this: if I ask for what I want, I'll be seen as ungrateful or difficult or asking for too much. I want to tell you, this isn't a flaw in you. And believe it or not, it is something from the time we were little girls that we were indoctrinated with. We were praised for being modest, agreeable, and selfless. But you know what? Those qualities are qualities that we used to survive. But the problem is they can become invisible cages as we grow into women. And what's really interesting is more and more we're doing research on this. And the research shows us how deeply our conditioning works. Would you be at all surprised to know that when women go for a job, they usually ask for 30 to 50% less than their male counterparts, even though they've got the same skills, even though in some cases they've got better skills? And the other thing that we notice is that both men and women, so think about this, even women, our fellow women, okay, undervalue women's contributions, even though women may be smarter, more qualified, more capable of doing the job. They will still think, a lot of women do this, they'll still think that the man is the better person for the job. I want to be clear though, I'm not here to bash men. I think men go through the same thing, but in different ways. Like, think about the poor guys who from the time they're really young are told that they've got to support their families, no matter what. So they face their own kind of societal pressures. But today it's about recognizing how these societal pressures, the cultural code that we've all absorbed, lowers the bar for us as women. And as a result of that, we lower our voice, we don't grab our power, and a lot of times we wish that we could be invisible because God forbid that we'd have, the spotlight on us. So I promised you this would be interactive. I hope everybody has their workbook. And by the way, I put another workbook in the chat that is a fillable workbook. So if you'd rather work with that, where you can type it in without having to print the workbook, go on ahead. But what I'd like you to do is go to page 4 of your workbook, okay? And write down one area of your personal life where you've been downplaying yourself. And I'm just going to give you a moment to do that because I think it's really important that part of this masterclass is for us to reflect, where do we show up? Where do these invisible barriers impact our lives? So just take a second, and then when you finish doing that, could you be kind enough to pop a yes in the chat if you've had the experience of either settling for less, asking for less, or going along even when you don't want to? Okay, would anyone feel like sharing perhaps something that they realized? Can you maybe pop it in the chat? All right. So let's talk about the perfection trap. Now, if you go into your workbook, I believe it's there. I think all of us know what this is. It's that pressure on us to be flawless. And as a result of that, we say to ourselves, well, if I can't do it perfectly, I'm not doing it at all. In fact, research shows that when men are trying to move forward with something, as long as they're 15% sure that it's pretty good, they're going to go for it. The number for women is woefully different. Women won't even present an idea unless they're 85% sure that they're right. There was this other study done where men and women were being asked to present their ideas after a problem was presented to them, and men had no problem putting up their hand and doing it. Women not only didn't put up their hand, but they erased the work that they were doing because, as far as they were concerned, it wasn't good enough. So that's the first key. You say, well, what has this got to do with my relationship? Well, it has everything to do with your relationship, because if you're not aware of the ways in which you stop yourself, second guessing, staying silent until everything is polished, how can you show up in your own relationship? Now, for people who are worried about being absolutely perfect, what we see is that you end up avoiding opportunities because you fear not measuring up. And then, of course, we set impossible standards for ourselves. Well, as we all know, that drains our energy. But here's the most important part. We're kind of taught that if we make a mistake, we're unworthy. Men make mistakes all the time. Most of the time, they don't even feel like they have to apologize for them. They see it as just, part of moving on in the world. Women, unfortunately, we don't do that. We really take it personally, as though it's something about us. And what I'm trying to tell you is that this is the conditioning we've been led to believe, or we've been conditioned to all our lives since we were little girls. So here's the thing. Women don't shrink because they lack ambition. We shrink because we've been taught shrinking keeps us safe. Think about that. Shrinking keeps us safe. And that imperfection makes us unworthy. I think it's so incredible. You have to shrink yourself to feel safe, because God forbid you be your authentic self, right? And you're going to get hammered for it. So now I'd like you to go to page 5, where I'm going to ask you to write down a time in your relationship. It can be past or present, and it can be, even though we're focusing on our intimate relationships today, it can be a professional relationship that comes to mind, where you didn't say what you wanted to say, maybe because you were second guessing yourself, or you didn't feel fully prepared, or maybe you felt like your feelings would rock the boat. So let's take a moment and just go to page 5 and write that in. You don't have to share it with us, but this is where I want you guys to reflect and say, hey, does this apply to me in any way? Is this something that unconsciously I do without realizing that I'm doing it? Okay, here's another invisible barrier. And my God, we have lots of them. But this one is a huge one for us, a lot of women in our relationships. It's called the approval addiction. Now, on the surface, we look like we're compromising, right? Or that we're being incredibly kind. But the reality is that we're actually letting other people run the show. Because the idea is that if I speak my truth, I'm going to lose connection. And that's not safe. So if in my relationship, I tell my partner that there's something I'm not happy with, that's going to make me really unsafe. Because what if he or she says, well, if that's the way you feel, I'm out of here. And believe it or not, that's a real underlying fear that we've been taught. And I think it's tied into the idea that we need our partners, right? That we can't survive on our own. Pretty scary thought, because when you think about it, all of us work for a living, or at least most of us do, or we've had to work at some point in our lives, right? We survived. So when we hear things like this, we have to realize that these are the things that sometimes get in the way of your relationship. Because if you're forever keeping silent to keep the peace, where are you in all of this? The other thing I want you to think about is, do you remember, if you're still in a relationship, when you first met the person that you're with now? Do you remember that? Okay. Because we didn't care so much back then, we met them, we thought they were attractive, we spoke our minds. We really did. We were like, what the hell? But it wasn't until we started really caring that we thought, oh, maybe I'm being too much, or, oh, maybe I'm too opinionated, or, oh, what if I'm not good enough? And yet when they first meet us, we're actually a lot more authentic. So how did we get here? Well, it's what I told you before. A developmental psychologist, Carol Gilligan, discovered something around the profound. Do you know that at around the age of 11, girls start to self-silence? We start to trade our authenticity for acceptance. Why? Well, we've kind of learned that in order to preserve connection in a world that often punishes outspoken girls, that's what we need to do. But here's the thing. What begins as a strategy grows into an identity. Then culture keeps reinforcing it, rewarding compliance, likability, and perfectionism over truth, power, and full expression. I'm hoping, or I don't know if any of you can relate to what I'm saying, but at least pop yes in the chat if you've ever felt like you had to trade truth for acceptance. Now, I'd love you to take a pause and think about this. How do these invisible barriers show up in your most intimate relationship? Well, here's the truth. If those hidden barriers stay in the shadows, no matter how many tools or skills I could teach you today and in the future, they're not going to stick. Why? Because the invisible barriers get in the way of you embracing the tools. It's kind of like when they talk about you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink. Well, in our case, we're already asking the question before we're led to water. Do I deserve to drink the water? Am I worthy of drinking the water? So there's the invisible barrier. So if I were trying to teach you how to walk from here to get the water, you're not going to go if you're already asking yourself questions like, yeah, but do I deserve it? So that's why we have to uncover what's underneath. The patterns, if we don't, will keep repeating. So that's the first part of uncovering your invisible barriers. That's the first part. The second part is you could say, okay, well, that's great. Okay, I know I give too much. Now what do I do about it? Well, that's the second part. The second part is developing our competencies. Okay? And what do I mean by developing our competencies? Well, this is where what we're going to do is, connecting with the strengths. So think about where your competencies lie. Sometimes, and I've had this happen before in treating women, they're this incredibly powerful woman at the office, and then they're subservient at home, or they lack a voice at home. And a lot of times, women will say to me that they're worried that they're not good enough. So if you start taking all their expertise at work and having them connect to how absolutely capable you actually are, and then take that strength and bring it to the areas of your life where you're feeling a bit weaker, and start realizing, wait a minute, I can't have good intuition at work and then it suddenly goes away at home, right? So some of the work that we do is to help you transition in that way, where you start looking at your competencies and seeing how these competencies can't live in a bubble. If you're competent at work, you're competent at home, whether you believe it or not. So, how do you do that? Well, in EMDR, some of you might be familiar with it, we call it installing. Athletes use it all the time. Let's say, I always remember Greg Louganis, and I know I'm dating myself right now, but he was a fantastic diver for the U.S. team. I'd say in the 76 or 82 Olympics. But one of the things he used to do is he would put a towel over his head, go off in a corner, and visualize his dive. Okay? This was him installing the strong parts of himself into that dive. He would visualize it and literally step by step by step all the way into the pool. He never looked at his score, and he never looked at the other divers. So this is what installation is about. Now, I want to be clear about this. It's not like I go, oh, I'm not good enough. Oh, I'm good enough. That's not going to work either. It's not about changing how you perceive something. You have to believe it. And that is some of the work that we do. Okay, and then the last thing, it's about learning to have compassion for yourself. Now, what is that? Well, how many of you have little compassion for your young self? You remember the one that was a kid who had no voice? How about compassion, excuse me, for the part of you that's afraid? How about having compassion for your strong self, even when other people tell you you're too much? And then, of course, having compassion for your whole self. I'm going to give you a couple of examples in just a few moments about what that looks like. But I thought I would start before that by introducing myself. I'm Dr. Carrie O'Reilly, and I'm both a psychoanalyst and a certified couples therapist. I created Women Need Connection, which is the name of my program, for two reasons. What I've discovered is that when women come into the therapy room with their partners, they're already in crisis, right? How many people come to couples counseling before they're in crisis? They don't. So one of the hardest things to do is to change the way you think about things, to learn new skills, and adopt new tools when you're already in crisis, right? It just doesn't happen. Or it does happen in some cases, but it's about 10 times harder. So I thought to myself, what I'd like to do is take all my years of education and training and seeing patients, take all the best research out there and put it together in one course. I think some of you've heard of Gottman and Getting the Love That You Want, sex therapists. There's all sorts of experts out there, but all of them have their own niche, right? They don't put it all together so that when you're thinking about your relationship, you're not just thinking about communication, you're thinking about sexual desire. What about sexual discrepancy desire, where one of you wants more sex than the other, or one of you is dealing with shame around sex? And then, of course, the thing that's, what's the word I'm looking for? The thing that is exclusive to us as women is all those barriers that I was telling you about. The other reason I wanted to do this is because in my late 20s, I was in the relationship of my dreams. Problem was, I didn't have a roadmap. I was so in love. And all I kept thinking was, I want this to last forever, right? But something happened. I started to get really afraid. The more in love I felt, the more scared I felt. The more scared I felt, the more my defense mechanisms started to kick in. I remember it so well. I'd be like nonchalant whenever we got together, even though inside I was like, oh, I'm so happy. Okay, but so we started going out, and then literally over time, I didn't even recognize myself anymore. I really didn't. Pop a yes in the chat if you can relate to this. But here's the thing, and probably you can guess where this is going. After nearly 5 years, the relationship ended. But the part that was so painful is what my lover said to me. I'll never forget it. And we're, 20 years later, something like that? Carrie, you're great at taking care of my life, but you're not good at taking care of my heart. Ooh, ouch. Even now it stings. And it took me so long to get over that relationship. But here's the thing. I didn't know how to be my real self. I really didn't. I didn't know how to be in love. On the outside, I was loving and giving. But, on the inside, fear was so running the show. I thought I had lucked out, won the lottery, right? And then I was like, how do I keep it? And what happens if the real me shows up? And, I went through that whole thing. Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I sexy enough? And the more I browbeat myself, the more I wasn't myself. And the more I wasn't at all like the person that had shown up for the first date. So whatever it is, those fears that all of us have can eat away at us until we're so defended, so shut down, that the vibrant woman who walked into that first date has disappeared. Now, you might think that's why I became a psychoanalyst and a certified couples therapist, but no. The route I took was, okay, I need to be as successful as my ex-lover, right? But after the breakup, I went back to school. I went to journalism school because I thought, if I do this, it'll make me feel good enough. I went back to school, as I said, and I became a journalist. And ultimately, I became an entertainment anchor. As you see, that's me on the red carpet. I even covered the Oscars twice. It was quite something. But here's the thing. I realized I was building other people's careers, not my own. I mean, when you're there going, hi, Tom Hanks, tell me about your film, or hey, Susan Sarandon, how does it feel to be walking the red carpet? You're just talking about other people. So I realized all of that and I thought, no, this doesn't work for me. I mean, it was great. Don't get me wrong, my 15 minutes of fame. But I wanted something more. So I went back to school, got my master's degree in psychology, came out of there thinking, God, I don't know anything. Because when I compared myself to other people that had graduated, a lot of them had either had got, bachelor's degrees in psychology or something like that. So I figured I had to make up for lost time. So I got a doctorate in psychoanalysis after I got the master's degree in psychology. And what I also discovered is, because originally I just wanted to be a journalist, is that being a therapist isn't all that different. Because when I'm in the room with my patients, I'm trying to get underneath to the story underneath. And of course, if you look at some of the greatest investigative journalists, that's exactly what they do. So really, in my room, I'm always digging beneath the surface to uncover the real story. And that's why when I made this discovery, it changed everything for me. And the discovery was that as women, we are so being held back by invisible barriers, beliefs instilled in us since we were a child. And here's the saddest part. They really do shape how we see ourselves in love. And sometimes we don't even notice. And you know what's really wild about this? Is that men don't suffer from this. They really don't. They don't carry the same set of limiting beliefs. And what happens to us is we start to underestimate our own competence. We downplay our achievements. We have a hard time holding boundaries. All we need is someone to say, oh, you're too mean or you're too hard, and we capitulate, right? But here's the truth. Your yearning for more love, more fulfillment, more connection isn't the problem. It's actually the solution. It really is. Because that's how you're going to show up in the relationship where you feel like you're being you, right? You're not looking in the mirror going, I don't recognize myself. And if you go back to page 4 where you wrote whatever you wrote, take a look at it right now and ask yourself a question. In what you wrote, were you minimizing yourself or your ambitions or your needs? All right. I know I've been talking a lot, and I'm going to show you some more information I think that will really help you. Because part of my mission is to help you uncover your greatest yearning, to remove the gaps between what you want and what your current reality gives you. Here's the thing. When you close that gap, you stop apologizing for wanting more, and you start living into the love and the life that you were always meant for. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Claire Zammit. She's this amazing psychologist and transformational teacher. She studied this in her groundbreaking research and actually did her dissertation on it. And she found out that intelligent, conscious women, just like you and me, are blocked from truly stepping into our greatness, not because we aren't capable, but because of the hidden barriers. What I'm saying to you is that once we're able to see what those barriers are, and they're individual, right? My barrier may be, I think I'm too much. Someone else might feel I'm invisible. Someone else might feel I'm not lovable. But once you see those barriers for what they are, you can actually overcome them. And as I said, it's not a case of just telling yourself, oh, no, I'm not too much, or, oh, yes, I'm lovable, because that's not going to work. No, we could tell ourselves that, but inside we don't believe it, right? So part of the work is doing the things that I talked to you about: amplification, learning the competencies, being compassionate, kind of doing a plus and minus so that we're able to recognize that the things that we keep telling ourselves aren't really true. And once we start to realize that, okay, then we're able to start working on those barriers so that we can show up in our relationships kind of in a more not only authentic way, but as an equal partner. Think about that. How many times do we feel that we're not equal to our partners? All right, so I'm just going to move on to another slide. Just give me a sec. I think I've pretty much told you why I'm qualified, so we can skip that one for a bit. But I want to give you a real life example about hidden barrier, okay? The first one is I'm invisible. I don't know if anything is, or if that is something that speaks to anyone in this room, but believe it or not, this is just one of 21 invisible barriers that Claire identified in her dissertation. And I have to say, I've also seen this with women in my own work. So when you recognize that the specific beliefs that quietly shape your love life, they're beliefs, by the way, we didn't choose, but they did get planted in us along the way. Once we realize that it's not who we are, it's sort of like what was pushed into us, we can start to shift. Here's what I'd like you to do. I want you to ask yourself, do I see myself here, like being invisible, even a little bit? Because the first thing we have to do, is recognize which one of these invisible barriers apply to us. And listen, there are a lot of them. Now, being invisible may not apply to you, but how about something like, I'm not enough? I'm alone. I'm unlovable. I'm crazy, right? These are all invisible barriers that get in the way. So would you be kind enough to go to page 6 in your booklet? Because I've put in all the information about the invisible barrier, right? And this way you can follow along. This is the belief that says people don't really see me. Women who carry this pattern are often, believe it or not, because they're so busy looking at other people, these are the women that are often the most perceptive in the room. You're tuned in, you're empathetic, and you see and hear what other people miss. Isn't that amazing? So it's kind of like when somebody's shy and they sit in the room, but they watch everybody, right? They don't miss much. But here's the problem. While you're so busy attuning to others, your own feelings and needs slip into the abyss. You assume others can just tell what you need, but you know what? They don't. Like, think about this. When you're being invisible so that you can observe, right? How on earth would other people just tell what you need? But here's the problem. When they don't recognize what you need, it reinforces that story that we tell ourselves. I don't matter. I could disappear. No one would ever miss me. So now, I'd like you to go to page 9 of your booklet and answer the questions. If you don't feel that I am invisible applies to you, what I would suggest you do is think about any friends or family members who are invisible and see how it applies to them. We'll just take a moment while you do that. Okay. Hopefully that gave you a little bit of time for self-reflection. I was talking to Claire Zammit, and she was one of those people that felt she was invisible. But when she really started to look at it, she realized that she was kind of increasing her own invisibility. And it's not like she was saying, oh, it's my fault. Not at all. But because she felt nobody cared or that she wasn't going to be seen, she used to do things to protect herself from that pain. Like she worked nights all the time. She had a 1-bedroom apartment in the burbs, okay? And she was single. And she was thinking, how am I going to meet a guy? And yet when she looked at the way that she was living her life, she was like, wow, I'm kind of putting all the obstacles in my own way. How on earth am I going to change this self-perception of myself as being invisible if I keep doing everything to reinforce it? And so she started to shift, and it really made a change in her life. You know how they say, fake it till you make it? Well, it's not quite like that. But what she started to do was what Greg Louganis did. She started to visualize the life that she wanted to have. And in doing that, she started to have that life. And it wasn't that far afterwards when she had moved back into the city, decided she wasn't going to work till 9 o'clock every night. she'd go to social events even though she had social anxiety. She would talk to her colleagues and tell her colleagues about this wonderful work she was doing rather than sort of fading into the background. And as a result of that, there was a pivot and everything changed. And according to her, not soon afterwards, she met the love of her life. And I'm not saying, it's all magic, but she made herself go from invisible to visible, which I think is really, really cool. So here's a second one, and it's in your book as well. And this one is very common to a lot of women, okay? And it is called I'm Not Enough. Self-sacrificing, overgiving, not creating value for yourself, right? These are all the symptoms of being I'm not good enough. Well, here's the thing. When you start treating yourself like you're not good enough, the people that you love also start to treat you like you're not good enough. I remember I have a client. He's such a wonderful guy. He was so crazy about his girlfriend, but he spent his whole time telling her that he was the lucky one and he didn't know what she was doing with him. Every time he made a mistake, he'd be like, I'm so stupid. I don't know why you care about me. Well, guess what happened? She started to believe him. So you have to be really careful. So after this, I'm going to be giving a 10-week program where you're not just going to talk about these shifts, we're going to practice them. Because the power isn't in knowing the truth, okay? The power is in living it. Claire didn't want to be invisible anymore, so she started to live a life where she wasn't invisible. She became aware of it, which is powerful, okay? But it doesn't transform your relationship. You need the new skills, the capacities to be able to embody it, to live from your deeper truth, right? So you're not just putting on a show. You're showing up in your relationship in a way that feels incredibly authentic to you. Is it hard? Yeah, it's hard. And is your spouse or your partner perhaps going to have some resistance to it? Well, absolutely, right? But they get used to it. They love you. All right. So today, I think I've been talking for a little while, yes. And we don't have time to go into any other details, but I think you can feel the power of these shifts, I hope. All right. And as I said, we're going to go into this in a much deeper way. All right. So let's go to the solution. What is the solution? You're going to develop competencies. You're going to connect to your strength. You're going to connect to the wise, loving, and resourceful mind that we all have. Really important. We're going to extend empathy to ourselves in areas where you struggle. And then we're going to break through our own inner glass ceiling. Believe it or not, we're often what gets in the way of our success. Now, a lot of you know that it's really expensive to get a divorce. In fact, it's something like it can be anywhere from $40,000 to $100,000. But here's the thing, there's the intangible things that you lose when you're not happy in your relationship or you leave your relationship. It's our connection to love. It's somebody who bears witness to our life. And the reality is it's the most emotional investment you're ever going to make. And let's face it, it's a lot cheaper than starting over. The average cost of a divorce, $40,000. Think about splitting of the assets. What about, nowadays where you split up your assets and you don't have enough money to buy a house because the market is so bad, but you still have to come up with first, last, and a security deposit. It's a really expensive way to go about it. But here's the other thing. Look at all the things you lose. You remember when your lover was your best friend? I know sometimes they don't feel like it right now, but there's a reason why you're with that person. It also often happens that you split up your circle of friends. It really diminishes our self-esteem. And here's the other thing. If you've got kids, oh my God, hopscotch. This house one weekend, that house another weekend. It's just exhausting. So now I want to move into the second key, which is the emotional and physical intimacy, right? This is so true. Emotional and physical intimacy requires vulnerability. But vulnerability can't exist without safety. So when you apply that to your sex life or intimacy, whether it's cuddling, whether it's wanting to touch your lover, right? You have to feel safe. And if you really think about it, if you're having any situation where you're not really feeling all that attracted, you're not really feeling all that excited and turned on, ask yourself a question. Do I feel safe? Because if you don't feel safe, how are you going to be vulnerable? So desire. Believe it or not, desire is never just one thing. It's all interconnected. Your physical self, your spiritual self, your emotional self, your sexual self, and then the relationship between you and your lover. And right there, do you see on the slide, in between is that small little place that's called desire. So here's something that many of you probably know, but maybe you don't know it all, is that arousal only happens when we feel safe. And I've never understood this. The parasympathetic is when we feel calm, when we feel sexy, when we're curious. But the sympathetic, which you think would be the other way around, is when we feel stressed, when fight, flight, or freeze comes into place. And that shows up as anxiety, aversion, withholding, resentment, right? So think about how on earth are you going to desire your mate when you're feeling those things when you're in the sympathetic. So in order to get aroused, you have to be in the sympathetic. The other thing that happens is that we're told that there's step one, step two. So step one might be holding hands. Step two, when we were kids, was like going to, first base, second base, home run, right? And that step three then is sleeping with someone, and step four is having an orgasm. But the truth of the matter is it doesn't have to be like that. And in fact, they're coming out with ways of showing that you don't have to go through all those steps, because those steps limit you. But what you do have to do is first find the connection. Get your connection back. And part of that is feeling safe with that person, right? And then it's about talking to each other. What do you like? Being curious, does this feel good? What are things that turn you off? Because if you don't have those conversations, right, you're kind of feeling like you're going into a minefield because you don't know what your lover wants. So if you can be intimate with them, you can certainly talk to them. Now, you don't do it when you're in bed, right? That's not the time to do it unless, you're exploring each other's bodies. But you do it kind of like, hey, do you have any fantasies? What is it that you like? So that's where you're investigating each other's pleasure, right? That checklist, when you get into bed and it doesn't quite work, that's the last thing you need to be worried about. Because as long as you hold on to your connection with each other, right, you'll be able to work through that. So instead of asking what went wrong, you get to ask, can we stay steady? Can we stay connected? So I didn't know this. I don't know about you guys, but I never knew. I always thought that desire was just sort of sexual attraction. But in actual fact, desire is something that while it happens to you, we actually all have the power to make it grow. So when you feel desire, ask yourself a question. Do you fan it or do you shut it down? Think about the last time you were making love and you went into your head, right? What was going on there? Because if you're going into your head, you're shutting it down. If you're going into the feeling of how great your lover's body feels, how wonderful it feels to touch them, then you're fanning it. And a lot of people who will say, well, I just lost my desire. Well, guess what? You can get it back, but you have to be focused on the right things. Okay, so are all of you able to stay? Because, I can go into what the program is about, but personally, I would much rather talk to you about the third thing. And then afterwards, I'll be here for Q&A, and I'll be here to tell you about the program. So I'm just going to skip through all of this, okay? And get to the third key. Going from monologues to dialogues. Why is that important? Because it's the only way you can communicate more deeply and more lovingly. Because there are 3 stages to a relationship. The first is the romantic love. You remember when we were all so curious? We'd go out for these romantic dinners. It was wonderful. And then I think they call it the honeymoon period. But then we get into the power struggle, where when your lover doesn't follow the script you had already written for them when you met them, and you don't follow their script. A lot of times we get stuck in that for a really long time, right? And this is where this communication comes in, right? And then the third part is real love. Now, what is real love? Well, real love is when you actually love your partner for who they are rather than who you want them to be. It's a hard one, because when we fall in love, we want people to fill all those gaps we have, right? And the problem is that they're not here to fill in all our gaps. We're here to fill in all the gaps. So let's take a look at this. As I said, the 3 stages of the relationship. Romantic love is driven by expectation. The power struggle, okay? That's when you start to feel disillusioned. You're angry. You're depressed. Right? That's the power struggle. And why do we feel that way? It's because our lover isn't meeting our expectations. We want our lover to be the way we need them to be. But you know what? They're not going to be. You can't change somebody. And the more you try to change them, or the more you focus on what they're not giving you, right? The more you stay in this power struggle. Here it is. This is the way it is. Get it? No, it's that way. This is the way it is. It's the problem of every single couple. You can't fall in love without ending up in the power struggle. Right? Then we get to real love. And in order to achieve real love, one of the very first things we have to do is go back to being curious and learn a new way to talk. Because when it really comes down to it, our universal human need, think about this, I want to be seen. God, I want to be heard. But most important, I want to be valued. Listening is challenging for 2 reasons. And I think this is incredible. I just found this out recently. Do you know that because of all the other noises that come in at the same time that we're listening, it could be a bird chirping and your dog barking, that our ears can only listen with 30% accuracy. Now, professional musicians who are pitch perfect, they get it up to about 50%. But think about this. If our ears can only hear at 30%, what are we missing when we're having conversations with our lover? That's why we have to shift from monologue to dialogue. Monologue is when that person's talking to you and your lover's looking at you as though they're listening, but their mind's somewhere completely else. As they said, I'm not listening, I'm just pretending. Dialogue is shared talking. I'm talking, I'm listening. Do you know that we are interrupted on average after 17 seconds of saying anything to anyone? It's really quite something. But talking is the most dangerous thing people do. Why? Because when you share how you feel, and it's different from how your partner feels, then what? Right? Often that's where the fight starts. But when you dialogue properly, you really get an opportunity to be seen, to be heard, and most important, to be valued. Why? Because when you're truly, truly listening, instead of defending yourself, you're getting a glimpse into your lover's inner world. Think of it like reading somebody's mind, okay? When someone is presenting to you how they feel, you don't have to agree with them, right? But you have to understand that it's how they feel from their perspective. And it's their perspective. So if you can say to yourself, well, it's rather than defending myself or saying to yourself, well, that's not how it was, and you can't wait to say, no, you've got it wrong. But you're missing an incredible opportunity because all of us see the world from our own perspective. If you can hold back and say to yourself, I really want to understand why he thinks this way or why she thinks this way. How did they come up with this perspective? You'll do it if you're really listening, not to react, but to understand. And the only way you can do that is if you encourage, when you're listening, the other person to keep telling you more. Now, this is where it gets really tricky because all of us want to say, well, your perspective's wrong, but it's not wrong. It's their perspective. It's how they see it. So do you want to understand how they see it? Or do you just want to defend yourself? Because if you really want to understand how they see it, then perhaps the way they're reacting to you makes sense. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It makes sense. So if I'm seeing it from the perspective of, I'm going to use something simple. Let's say every time you come home, the lights are on. And you say, I don't know how many times I tell you that, we need to save money. Could you please turn out the lights? Yeah. What if you said, I keep telling you to turn off the lights, but I'm wondering what goes on for you that you don't turn out the lights? Because, it's a simple thing to do, but I do notice, especially when it's getting dark, that you keep the lights on. Can you share with me what might that be about? Well, if you're curious and they say, well, when I was a kid, I was afraid of the dark. Now, it'd be really easy at that point to say, oh, yeah, but we all were. No. But if you were to say, well, can you expand on that or tell me more about it? And the deeper you go, you're able to understand. And sometimes it goes so deep that you discover something that you never knew about your partner. Like when they were bad, their parents locked them in a dark closet, right? So for them, having it be dark brings up all those fears of childhood. But if you just brush it off and you're not curious about it, you're not going to find these kinds of things out. And that's why this dialogue, which was developed by Harville Hendrix, right, is so invaluable because when you practice with this dialogue, which we will do in the class, what you'll discover is that not only can you have deeper more connecting conversations that allow you to express some empathy, allow you to be validated, you feel more connected to your partner, and more importantly, you really learn things about your partner. So when you're at the validation here and you're saying, you make sense, all right, you're not agreeing with them. What you're saying is that when you look at it from their perspective, so when you look at it from the child, the man or the woman, okay, who was locked in a closet in the dark, now you can understand why when it gets dark, that irrational fear comes up and they need the lights on. Being able to say, well, wow, now that I know what happened to you as a child, I can really understand why you need to keep the lights on. It doesn't mean that you necessarily agree with it. You might be thinking, yeah, but our electricity bill. But when you can say, hey, I get it now. And I can imagine, when it gets dark, you might be feeling this, that, and the other. Imagine how understood your partner would feel. And again, your partner doesn't have to be here for us to work on this, because let's face it, if you start mirroring back to your partner and asking those questions, they may not notice right away, but with a little bit of time, they're going to notice. And they're going to start responding and maybe even being more curious about you. So those are the 3 keys. You've got a 34-page workbook, and I really hope that you've learned some important things today. I really didn't want this to be some fluff and whatever. I think there are 3 very important things. And I'm available for questions and answers now. And also, let me just quickly tell you about the course that I'm doing. It's a beta program. And what I mean by beta is I've been doing this for years, but I've never written my own course. And what I've done is I've taken the best of the best, whether it's Gottman's stuff or Harville Hendricks, my own clinical experience. I consult a lot with sex experts. And what I want to do is create a course that hits every part of your relationship, not just one part, okay? And it's going to be a 10-week course. Let me just show you a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to meet weekly for 2 hours for 10 weeks. Then that means you're going to get 20 hours of live coaching. Then what we're going to do is on alternate weeks, we're going to have a Q&A, a live Q&A for an hour. So let's say we're working on things as a group, but you come back and you go, hey, Kara, I didn't quite understand this. Can we talk about it more? That's what the purpose is of that. So you'll get 10 more hours of live coaching. The module you got, or the little book you got today, I'm going to be creating that book for every module we're in. Then let's say it's your daughter's birthday, or, you just can't come one week. What I'm going to do is the replay of what we do is going to be on the portal. So if you miss it, you can still catch up on it and watch the replay, right? And then we're going to be on a private Facebook where, if you want to share some thoughts or epiphanies, that you can do that. So that's what the program is about. And in the program, we're going to go through all of this: self-worth, self-expression. Here are some of the things we're going to focus on. We're also going to get a deeper look into sexual intimacy, sexual shame, sexual desire discrepancies. And we're going to do a test that's going to show you with 90%, and this is what the research backs up, 90% certainty whether or not your relationship that you may be in right now is doomed. Yeah, I know it sounds dramatic, but honestly, they've done the research and they can ascertain that with about 90% efficiency. So we're also going to learn some tools on how to ask for a behavior change in your partner and to get buy-in on it. We're going to look at how some of those childhood traumas, like the poor guy that got locked in the closet, how they're alive and well in your relationship, and you may not even be aware of it. And I think most of you have heard about the 5 love languages. Some people think it's pop psychology, but in actual fact, it is the best roadmap on how to connect with your partner. And we're going to go into that with some, deepness. So how much does the course cost? Well, because it's a beta program, okay, usually this course will probably go for about $19.97, something like that. But with 30 hours of live coaching, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on for $997. So if you think about 30 hours, that's about 30, you're going to pay about $33.25 per hour. And here's the thing, I hate that rate of exchange. So if you're Canadian, I don't want you to have to pay a whole lot more than your American counterparts or people who have the euro. So if you're interested in taking the course, if you send me an email at womenneedconnection@gmail.com, okay, I can set up an e-transfer with you so that you can pay it in Canadian funds. Because this is about getting you guys the skills, the tools, the understanding that you need. All right. And then there is an incentive. There's always an incentive. For the first 5 women who sign up, and it doesn't have to be by midnight tonight. How about just the first 5 women that sign up? I am going to offer you the EQI Emotional Intelligence Test for free. This is a kind of test that measures on all these different levels. And let me just show you. You might recognize the book cover, right? Well, I've been administering this test for years with a lot of my clients. It's not a test that just a layman can administer. You have to have a certain level of expertise and a psychology background. But it's a fantastic way where you can take a look at where does your emotional intelligence land. Because emotional intelligence isn't chronological. We've all met 50-year-olds who act like they're 10. And we've actually met 12-year-olds that feel like they're as wise as the day is long. Those are the 5 pillars of the emotional intelligence. And this is what gets tested: your self-awareness, your self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and your people skills. It's really fantastic. And as part of that, what I'm going to do is I am going to then give you 30 minutes of coaching to discuss the results. So you will get the official report from the emotional intelligence. And then we're going to do a 30-minute coaching session where I can help you understand what those results mean and what are some of the steps that you can take to increase your emotional intelligence or to work on places where you have blocks. So that's it. Does anyone have any questions? Please tell me there's at least one question.
I have a question.
Sure.
The blocks,
Hi, Patty.
the hidden blocks.
Yeah.
Hi. First off, I know I'm here supporting, but I absolutely love everything you've shared today, and I've learned so much.
Mm-hmm.
The emotional hidden blocks, like, is there a number of them that we, in general, women have? Is it like, 1 to 5 or, yeah.
Well, we can have, great question. We can have multiple blocks. I think it's the degree of severity that matters. Mm-hmm. And in the course, what we're going to do is we're going to look at those blocks. So let's just say, and this is Patty, my wing woman, who's helping me out. Let's just say you've got 3 of them. And I'm just going to make them up. I'm not good enough. I'm alone. I'm unlovable. In the course, we're going to work on all 3 of those. We're going to help you develop the competencies. We're going to help you not go from, oh, aren't I so lovable? Because that's just words. We're going to work on what I talked about with EMDR, installing real life experiences that you've had that negate the story that you tell yourself until you're actually believing it and able to go, well, wait a minute, how can I say I'm not lovable? My daughter comes home every time she can have a break from school, and she brings all her friends. So part of
God, that's literally my life.
There you go.
Like read my mind just now.
So what I want to say is, it's not like hocus pocus. It's hard work,
Right.
but it's measurable, and that's what we're going to be working on. Because in order to be who you really want to be in your relationships, you have to get rid of those blocks, because they're what gets in the way. If somebody's afraid they're not lovable, they're going to totally acquiesce to everything when they have a lover.
Right.
But the problem is, they're turning themselves inside out for that, and after a while they start to feel like they're disappearing. And then there's that little voice that keeps going, but what about me? What about me?
So powerful. I don't want to take up too much time, but I can see how, regardless of whether the relationship continues or doesn't, it's that like truly empowering. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. And listen, these are things that, you might feel, for example, that you're very worthy in your relationship with your lover, but you feel unworthy at work. So these skills apply to whatever situation you're in. I'm just teaching it in relation to a relationship, because I have these amazing women that show up in my room, successful professional women. And then when I hear how they diminish themselves and dumb themselves down in their relationships, it is heartbreaking. And that's why I'm focusing on it in terms of a relationship, intimate relationship. But you can totally extrapolate it for any relationship, whether it's friendships. If you've got a friend that's always putting you down, you get to a point where you go, do I really want to have a friendship with that person? But until you feel that you're worthy of more, you have to feel it and believe it, right? You're not going to challenge those beliefs. So part of the course is helping you to get there. Thank you for the question. Anybody else?
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up, and thank you so much for joining me. If you're at all interested in taking this course, it's going to start in October. We're going to do it on Saturday mornings from 8 to 10 Pacific time. And if you want to sign up for the course, and you don't have to, you've learned important things here today, so you may be fine with what you've learned. But if you want to dig a little bit deeper, go to www.womenneedconnection.com. And on that homepage, you can find out more about the course. There's also a link. It's called Reignite Your Intimacy. That's about the program itself. But I also invite you to, explore the website, because there's a lot more information than I was able to give you here today, and also some things that you might learn that are helpful. All right. Has that brought up any other questions or anything for anyone? Hey, I really appreciate you guys showing up. Please, I hope the workbook is helpful for you. And more than anything else, I hope you're taking away something that lands for you or that speaks to you, because I know that there are a lot of these free masterclasses out there, and God, I hate the ones that are all just full of fluff. So I was trying my damnedest to make sure that you walked away with something substantial. All right. Take good care, and hopefully I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Hmm.